Hey guys, it's just something I want to share with you quickly. In all my fabrication years, I've come across many things that I've used for the helping of bending metals and stuff, but there's one thing I've come across, and it's been my best friend ever since I got it. If you have access to it, and you can find one, get yourself a piece of rail. It is the best thing. It's got flat surfaces, it's got thin surfaces, it's very flat here. The top of the rail is slightly rounded, it's got a rolled edge. It's fantastic. I can't tell you how many times I use this thing, and I'm going to use it right now too. So it's got this little crevice here, so what I'm going to do is another one of my tools is just a piece of round iron. So I marked right here where the roll of the car is. So the bottom of the door edge rolls this way, but the top rolls in. So I'm going to just use my little piece of rolled iron here. So now I have to roll the bottom of this round this way. Fits nicely in there. See that? We're pretty close. Now let's go bend the edge. Alright guys, so I've got my patch made and I've made it larger than the area. My rotted area is right here. The patch is larger, which is perfectly fine. So I've got my cut marks. I'm going to cut here, I'm going to cut here, and here. But before I cut those marks, I'm going to cut it even smaller. If I can find that I'm within good metal, cutting smaller, I'm going to cut the patch down smaller because I'd rather just leave the good stuff there and just remove what's necessary. So let's cut smaller. I'm going to mark just roughly. We'll start with that, and then we'll see if that covers what needs to be removed. Okay, so I got my small piece cut off. Like I said, I want to cut inside of my line to where the size of the patch is. So this is the patch. This is what I cut off. So like I said, I want to cut small because I want to make sure that I don't need to take off more than I need and do more work than necessary, and you know, the story. So now that this is off, I can look at the back side, and this is what I cut it off for to see. So you can see right here that the rust is pretty heavy and crusty up here, and this is the top, and down here it starts to fade off. So the bottom is not so bad, but the top is heavier. But the other thing is too, on the shell right here, you can see it's rotted, and the scaling on the shell goes further back. So there's two things I'm looking for. I want to make sure that I take off enough of the skin metal to remove all the heavy crusty stuff, but also make sure that I leave myself enough room to make the repairs on the shell because it's rotted. So I'll have to make a small patch for the corner here. But now I just have to come back a little further, and there's no possible way that you're gonna get so far that you're not gonna get to good, clean metal in the seams, because these are 50-year-old cars. There's gonna be rust everywhere. So you go up as far as you can within reason to get into some decent metal. You sandblast this all, and then when the new patch goes on, everything will all be covered, and you're gonna have a nice clean job. That's that. Now remember too, when you're cutting the skin, that you don't cut so deep at the edge here that you cut into your shell. You want to be mindful of that also. so the scale goes up a little further, so I still got room to go. So I'm gonna cut up to the top here. Over here, I'll cut back a little more. So it does look like I'm gonna finish off cutting up what I had originally sized out for the piece. Just kind of surface rust here, and it's getting to the same thing up here. It's just kind of surface rust, so that's good. So now I'm going to make my patch for the inside, finish off the patch for the outside, and this corner will be done. Guys, I want to give you a little trick of my trade as far as helping to fabricate patches. So I got this patch partially made for the shell of the car because it is rotted. I gotta replace it. So again, the patch is bigger than what I need. So what I want to do, I mentioned in another video, letting the car help you make the patch. So I've got a little impression here to follow where it lines up in here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put this, I'm gonna set this in, nestle it in where it needs to be. I'm going to clamp this thing in place. I'm going to clamp this up here, put this one down here, put this one here. I'm securing the edge of it to the outside edge of the shell because I don't want it to move. I don't want the shell to bend. So I have this whole edge secured. I'm going to put one right here just to hold the sides. So I'm going to put a dolly on the back side just to stop any additional movement. Now, there's a gully behind here, but it recesses a little further than what I did. So I'm going to hit on that inside line. You can hear it sounds solid too. Now you can see the more I'm hitting it, the more it's rolling into shape, but it's also stretching the metal. The inside of this rolls in. Not all of this metal is going to bend, so not all of this metal do I need, so I'm going to cut off what I don't need and then just finish the roll. Hammers with very pointy ends because it concentrates the impact instead of trying to hit it and move more metal than wants to at one time. Like this big end is going to spread out the impact. It's not going to stretch as much, but with something small like this, you're making small little impact shots which will stretch the metal faster. I kind of want to stop because my line is starting to move up. So this vice grip is pretty tight, but the metal is still moving because it's rolling and wants to roll in. So I'm going to stop here. I'm going to take the patch off and I'll clean up inside here a little bit, I'll cut off what I need, and I'll finish cleaning up the edge. And see, I also, when I made patch, I also allowed myself, that was the edge, I also allowed myself a little bit extra so if it does roll, it's not going to go beyond what I need. I've still actually got a little bit of metal there to trim, and when I set this in, it's going to drop down a little bit because this edge, when it rolls around the edge here, it's actually larger than that, so when I cut this off, this is going to drop down, so I'll have plenty to cut off. Let's see how it's rolled into the contour. So we've got this little triangular gully here. It rolls around. Now obviously you can see that the impression of the stamping is rolled and folded there, so I'm not going to get all that, but I'm going to be cutting right up there on that rounded part because that's as far as the bad metal goes. That's my trick 101. So I'll cut this off, finish the roll, finish the shaping, and we're good to go. I got the shell patch made, so you can see that it's got the contour and everything. I trimmed off all the extra that I didn't need, so it really came back to a much smaller piece. So now that I got it cut the size and where I wanted it, I cleaned up all the undercoating and crud and rust and everything that was in here. Now I can see my good metal from my rusty metal. So after doing that, that's when I trimmed everything back. Now I can see exactly what I need to cut off. So once I cut this off, this is going to fit in just nicely. I'm going to trim it just inside the mark, so I have a little bit of a ledge to set this on. And I also left my outside longer. I can trim that off later because, like I said earlier, once you set that in place, it's going to move ever so slightly, but it will come out. That will leave me plenty to cut off later. So I'm leaving that long so I don't make the mistake of cutting off too much. So now I'm going to trim this back and fit this piece in, cut it, trim it, weld it, and this will be ready to go. I'll prime it up, treat it, and then the other patch will be ready to be fit and welded in also. So that's the next process, that's the next step of the process, and again, that's that. Alright guys, so what I'm finishing up on this door patch for the GTX Road Runner. So now the next step is to set it in place, but I just want to go over a couple of reminders of what I've said before. So in the patch here, there is a very little overlap, like 1/8 of an inch, and on that 1/8 of an inch I roll that in, so when the patch sets in there, it's going to be set inside that little valley again, so it's nice and tight. So let's go ahead and get this thing board in there to stop the door from closing. So let's go ahead and get the patch in. One other tip I want to use is you always want to be careful to line up the bottom of the patch with the bottom edge of the door. And it's easy to make that mistake of having the patch down or up. So here's my little tip trick for you. So I'm going to set the patch in place where it needs to be, right here, close, and make sure the back's lined up right here. One other thing too, I always cut my edges so it's a butt weld, because you don't want a bridge or a heavy lip or anything like that. And then right here, as it goes into the skin, then I'll re-overlap it again. So what I'm going to do now, take this piece of angle iron, I'm going to set it at the bottom right here. Make sure that's set down nice and tight. I'm going to take the locking pliers. I don't want to call them what they are because I don't know if that's a trademark thing. No. So I got these two here. So make sure it's set nice and tight. So what I want to do, make sure it's flush to the bottom of the door. I'm going to clamp back here too because I want to make sure that it's good this way as well as this way. So now that I've got this in place, this looks good. Clamp this here, the nice butt welds, seam right there with just a little bit of a gap. And I'm going to put this pair down here. So I'm going to replace, now that I've got this in place, I'm going to remove this pair here. I'm going to reset it here. I don't want the patch to move, because obviously I can't weld with the bracket in place. So that's in place. Give myself a nice eyeball view. Looks good. Okay. So we're looking good here. So I'm going to take another pair of clamps, put it further out to close this gap right here. Okay, looking really good, looking good. Now I'll take another pair, set it on the bottom, so it doesn't move on me. So both the gaps are tight. So, safety goggles off, welding helmet on, grounded. Now what I'm going to do, first thing I want to do is tack my edges so they don't move, and then the rest will get filled in after. This can come off. Now I want to start tacking the center. And you want to be sure that it's set inwards, not outwards. You want to be sure not to have any mounds. Here we go. Push it in with a hammer or something. What I did with the clamps here, I opened up the jaws, another little trick. Because you can't, the door shell is way back here. There's no way you're going to get back there to put a clamp on it. So open up the clamps, grab the bottom, and just with the space that the clamps are apart, you can use them as a pry. Push that in. Just to close up the gaps between the two panels, because remember, you always want those nice and tight. Pair of clamps, just put them anywhere. So now you can use them to steady your hand. I always try to keep my hands away from my work, because a lot of times if you get your hand rested against here and you're welding, guess what? You can get a piece of slag caught between your hands and the metal, and that hurts. Now, over here, I want to make sure that my edges are flush. And what I want to do now, I want to tack right at the edge, so when I roll this around that it doesn't pull and create a gap. So right exactly where I want the metal to roll around is where I'm going to put that tack on. So now when I roll this, it's not going to move. It's going to stay nice and straight down here. Same thing I'm going to do on the bottom. Now when you're welding the outside panels, there's a lot of place for the heat to travel out, which you don't want. So 1 or 2 tacks, and then you want to cool it down quickly. You get it much hotter than that, you're going to create a lot of distortion, and you're going to make more work for yourself later. One other thing to remember is make sure you bounce around on your tack welds. Don't do a continuous line, because you'll create too much heat. Go from here to here, bounce around. But I like to tag off of the welds that are already made. I don't like to keep going in the centers of others. Alright guys, now that I got the patch welded on the front, I haven't ground it yet because I have to take care of the back now. So the edges need to be rolled around. Now because I don't have a factory piece, I had to make my own. So this corner is really tight. It's more of a corner than round. So I'm going to address that after, but to make the roundness that I need to, I'm going to use the end of this pipe, which is about the roundness of there. I'm going to put this on there like that, and then roll it around with my hammer after. But right now I have to roll the edges of the corner around. So I'm going to clamp this, clamp the two together. You can see it's closing in. So I'm a little tighter. Right, see how they're closing? So you want those together. So now it's just a matter of a hammer and dolly. So I want to put the dolly on the back side. I mean, I could do this, but I want to make sure that there's something solid behind it so I don't overroll it. You want to make sure you work it back and forth, not just slamming it all together at once. this edge has a little bit of a roll to it, so I'm going to use the rounded side of my dolly right on the edge where it needs to be. This is thinner than this here because this part of the door right here where it rolls around, they thin it out so the skin can contour with the shell. So I can make this contour do what I want it to do after I squeeze both together and pinch it. So I just need to finish closing this up, but right now I have to address this corner, which is going to take a little time. Alright guys, so I'm pretty well done with the patch on the door. So as you can see, there's a little bit of space on either side of the weld. You kind of want that. You don't want such a smooth surface that there's nothing to fill. That's pretty close to the surface. No, I don't want to be any closer. I want to make sure there's a little bit of body filler in there. And when I say body filler, I mean fiberglass filler of some kind. I might tap it in a little bit. So I had to make a small adjustment to the door. I had to bring it up so my line was good. Now when I rolled the edge down here, when I made the template, the corner was sharp. So I had to roll it around. So it still needs a little tweaking because it's still too close down here. So what I'm going to end up having to do is I'm going to end up having to grind this back a little bit to make an even line around, and then I'll have to re-weld it and reshape it. Other than that, it came out really good. So that's about it. The back side, you can see it's all folded right around nice and neat. It's ready to go. So I'll clean this up, treat it, weld the edges. Don't forget to weld your edges right here and down here. You gotta weld them up too. That's it.